Dr. Ethan Reed stood in the bustling emergency room of St. James Hospital, the familiar sounds of beeping monitors and frantic footsteps surrounding him like a chaotic symphony. His brow was furrowed in concentration as he moved swiftly from one patient to another, his compassionate demeanor a stark contrast to the sterile environment. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh glare on the stark white walls, but in Ethan's world, it was the lives in front of him that mattered. "Dr. Reed, we've got a 30-year-old male with a suspected cardiac arrest in room 3, called out Nurse Kelly, her voice cutting through the noise. She was a seasoned nurse, her hands steady and movements practiced, but there was a hint of urgency in her tone. "On it," Ethan replied, already on the move. He could feel the pressure mounting, not just from the urgency of the patients, but from the hospital administration's constant reminders to prioritize profits over care. It was a sentiment that gnawed at him, especially on days like today when he felt the weight of lives in his hands. As he entered room 3, he was greeted by the sight of a young man lying motionless on the gurney, the pale hue of his skin contrasting sharply with the bright green of the hospital sheets. Ethan wasted no time, quickly assessing the situation. "Start compressions. Get the defibrillator ready," he shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. The team sprang into action, and Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline. He positioned himself beside the patient, his hands firm on the man's chest as he began the rhythmic compressions, counting in his head. 1, 2, 3. The numbers flowed like a mantra, grounding him even as the world around him blurred. After what felt like an eternity, the defibrillator was ready. "Clear!" he shouted, stepping back as the machine delivered a jolt of electricity to the patient's heart. The man's body jolted, and for a moment, hope flickered in the room. Ethan leaned in, focused, waiting for the telltale signs of life. Come on," he urged under his breath, his heart racing in tandem with that of the young man who lay before him. With another round of compressions and the defibrillator's assistance, the patient's heart finally regained a rhythm. A weak pulse, but a pulse nonetheless. "Good work, team," Ethan said, wiping the sweat from his brow as he stepped back, allowing the nurses to take over. He felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over him, but it was a familiar feeling, a feeling he cherished, despite the pressures he faced from the administration. Later, as he walked through the bustling halls, he overheard snippets of conversation among his colleagues. "Did you hear about the new policies? They're cutting back on resources for the ER again," one nurse said, shaking her head. "It's all about the bottom line now." Ethan's heart sank. He had witnessed the changes firsthand, the shift from patient-centered care to a profit-driven model. It infuriated him. He was a physician, not a businessman. Every day, he fought to provide the best care possible. But with each passing month, the constraints tightened. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, Ethan finished his shift, exhausted but fulfilled. He loved his job. It was his calling. But as he stepped outside, the cool evening air hit him, and he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that followed him. The weight of the hospital's policies loomed over him like a dark cloud. As he walked to his car, he noticed a figure huddled against the hospital's exterior wall. It was a homeless man, his clothes tattered and dirty, shivering in the fading light. Ethan's heart ached at the sight. He felt an overwhelming urge to help, a reflex honed through years of medical training and compassion. "Hey there," Ethan called gently as he approached. "Are you okay?" The man looked up, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Ethan knelt beside him, noticing the deep lines etched on his face. "What's your name?" "Tom," the man muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan could see the tremors in his hands, the signs of someone who had faced unimaginable struggles. "Tom, let's get you inside. You need medical attention," Ethan said, determination in his voice. He knew he was off duty, but the thought of leaving Tom outside in the cold made his stomach churn. He reached out a hand and helped Tom to his feet, feeling the man's weight lean against him. "I don't want to be a bother," Tom said, his voice shaking. "You're not a bother. You need help?" Ethan insisted, wrapping an arm around Tom's waist to support him as they walked towards the entrance. He could hear the commotion of the ER just beyond the doors, but his focus remained on Tom. Once inside, the chaos of the emergency room enveloped them. Ethan called for a nurse while guiding Tom to a nearby chair. "Please, get a blanket and some vitals for this man," he instructed, his voice firm yet caring. "Dr. Reed, what are you doing?" Nurse Kelly asked, confusion crossing her face. "He needs help, Kelly. Just do it, please," Ethan replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Tom slumped in the chair, his body trembling as he tried to catch his breath. As the nurse hurried off, Ethan knelt beside Tom again, concern etched on his face. "Tom, can you tell me how you got here? Just lost everything?" Tom whispered, his eyes flickering with a mix of despair and fear. "I didn't mean to end up like this. You don't have to be alone anymore," Ethan said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Tom's shoulder. "We'll take care of you. Just hold on." Before long, the nurses returned with blankets and equipment, and the room buzzed with activity. Ethan took charge, directing the team as they worked to stabilize Tom. He could feel the eyes of the hospital administration on him, a watchful presence lingering at the edges of the chaos. He was aware of their judgment but pushed it aside, focusing solely on the man in front of him. "Get me in 4 and check for any underlying issues," he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. He knew that the administration would have a problem with this, helping someone they deemed unworthy of their resources. But in that moment, he didn't care. As Tom's condition began to stabilize, Ethan felt a surge of relief wash over him. The room was still chaotic, but he found solace in the small victories. He glanced up to see a few of his colleagues nodding in appreciation, their respect for him evident despite the looming shadows of the administration. "Dr. Reed, are you sure this is the right call?" one of the nurses asked quietly, concern etched on her face. "Every life matters," Ethan replied, his voice resolute. "We can't turn our backs on someone just because of their circumstances." The murmurs from the administration grew louder, a mix of disbelief and anger simmering just below the surface. Ethan could sense the tension, but he remained focused on Tom, determined to give him the care he deserved. In that moment, he knew he would face the consequences of his actions, but he was prepared to fight for what he believed in. As the chaos continued to swirl around him, Ethan's heart raced with the knowledge that this was just the beginning. What lay ahead would test not only his commitment to his patients but also the very fabric of the hospital he had dedicated his life to. And in the back of his mind, a nagging question lingered. Who exactly was Tom, and what secrets lay beneath the surface of his seemingly simple life? As the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, the tension in the boardroom of St. Michael's Hospital was palpable. The room was filled with the hospital's executive team, their faces a mixture of concern and indignation. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Dr. Helen Wright, the hospital director, her fingers steepled under her chin as she surveyed her colleagues. The recent incident involving Dr. Ethan Reed had stirred up quite a hornet's nest, and now it was time to address the fallout. "We can't allow this to set a precedent," she began, her voice cool and authoritative. "We're a hospital, not a charity. If we start treating every person who walks through our doors, we'll be bankrupt by the end of the month." Dr. Mark Thompson, the chief financial officer, nodded vigorously. "Exactly. We need to protect our bottom line." Dr. Reed's actions were not only reckless but also endangering our reputation. "We have a responsibility to our investors and our staff." "But he saved that man's life," countered Dr. Lisa Martinez, head of the ER. "Tom may have been homeless, but he was still a human being. What kind of message are we sending if we prioritize money over lives?" The room fell silent as Dr. Wright's gaze shifted to Dr. Martinez. "A message that we value our resources and the sustainability of this hospital," she replied firmly. "We need to make it clear that while we all want to help, we cannot compromise our policies." Ethan's actions, though noble, had put them in a precarious position. The stories surrounding the homeless man's treatment had already begun circulating, and with them, the potential for negative press. As the board continued to discuss the ramifications, it became increasingly clear that Ethan's heroic deed could cost him dearly. Meanwhile, Ethan was still in the hospital, unaware of the storm brewing overhead. He had taken a moment to step outside for some air after the chaos of stabilizing Tom. The cool night breeze brushed against his face, refreshing yet heavy with the weight of his decisions. He felt an unsettling mixture of pride and dread. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? Saving a life was the very essence of his job. But the nagging thought of the hospital administration's disapproval gnawed at him. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Dr. Martinez, asking him to come to the boardroom. Ethan sighed and made his way back inside, a tight knot forming in his stomach. As he approached the boardroom, he could hear the muffled voices growing louder. When he entered, all eyes turned to him, and he felt the weight of their judgment bearing down on him. Dr. Wright gestured for him to take a seat, her expression unreadable. "Dr. Reed," she began, her tone formal, "we need to discuss your actions regarding the homeless man, Tom." Ethan squared his shoulders, prepared for the confrontation. "I did what any physician would do. He was in distress, and I couldn't just stand by. While we appreciate your concern for the patient, your actions have put this hospital in a precarious position," Dr. Wright replied, her voice unwavering. "We need to prioritize our protocols and ensure that our resources are allocated appropriately. You've put us at risk." Ethan felt a rush of anger. Risk? I saved a man's life. What kind of place is this if we start turning our backs on those in need? Dr. Thompson interjected. "You're being emotional, Dr. Reed. This isn't just about you or the life you saved. It's about the institution. We cannot afford to be seen as a hospital that caters to every individual without regard for our policies. It's a liability." Ethan's heart raced. "A liability? You're talking about a human life as if it's a cost on a balance sheet. Tom deserves care just as much as any paying patient." "Enough," Dr. Wright said, her voice slicing through the tension. "We're not here to debate the morality of your actions. We're here to assess the implications. After careful consideration, the board has decided to terminate your employment." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as shock washed over him. You can't be serious," he stammered. "I did what I was trained to do." "Your training also includes adhering to hospital policies," Dr. Wright replied, her tone unwavering. "We cannot allow your actions to set a dangerous precedent. You've endangered the hospital's reputation and financial stability. This decision is final." As he stood to leave, Ethan felt a rush of emotions: betrayal, anger, and a profound sadness. He had dedicated his life to this hospital, to his patients, and now, in a matter of moments, it was all stripped away. "I can't believe this is happening," he murmured, more to himself than to the board. "Dr. Reed," Dr. Wright said, her voice softer now, "I truly appreciate your dedication to patient care, but we must look at the bigger picture. I wish you well in your future endeavors." He turned and walked out of the boardroom, the weight of their decision bearing down on him. As he exited the hospital, the world outside felt different, dimmer, somehow as if the colors had faded. The bustling sounds of the city, once a comforting background, now felt isolating. He had devoted his life to saving others, and yet he was now adrift, stripped of his purpose. As he made his way to his car, the incident replayed in his mind. The faces of the board members, the coldness in their eyes, the way they dismissed his passion as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. He felt anger boiling within him, but beneath that anger, there was a flicker of curiosity. Who was Tom, really? Why had he been on the streets? The nagging feeling that there was more to Tom's story than met the eye took root in his mind. Ethan dug his phone from his pocket and scrolled through the contacts, pausing over Dr. Martinez's name. He hesitated, then pressed the call button, hoping she might offer some insight into what had just happened. "Ethan," she answered after a few rings, her voice laced with concern. "I heard. I'm so sorry. They shouldn't have done that." "Thank you, Lisa. I can't believe it." Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. I don't understand how they can prioritize profits over lives. There's a lot of pressure from above, she said softly. But you did the right thing. Don't lose sight of that. I just can't shake the feeling that Tom is important somehow, Ethan confessed. I want to know who he is, why he was on the streets. Maybe you should look into it, she suggested. There might be something they're worth pursuing. Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. I think I will. I need to do something. I can't just walk away. After hanging up, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose ignite within him. Despite the betrayal he felt from the hospital, he couldn't ignore the gnawing curiosity about Tom's life. He had saved the man once. Perhaps he could do it again, not just for Tom but for himself. He would uncover the truth behind Tom's circumstances and, in doing so, reclaim a part of himself that had been lost in the sterile halls of St. Michael's. With determination coursing through his veins, he set off into the night, ready to dive headfirst into the unknown. Ethan sat at his small desk in the cramped office of the community health center, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above him. The walls were adorned with colorful posters promoting healthy living and mental wellness, but they did little to lift his spirits. He was enveloped in a haze of uncertainty and frustration. His thoughts drifted to Tom, the homeless man he had fought to save, now a victim of unfortunate circumstances and a victim of the very system he had dedicated his life to. Focus, Ethan, he murmured to himself, shaking off the remnants of doubt that clung to him. He had made it his mission to uncover Tom's past and, in doing so, perhaps shed light on the injustices that plagued the homeless community. With a deep breath, he opened his laptop, determined to find leads that might illuminate Tom's life before the streets. He began by contacting local shelters and social services, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he typed away. The first few calls yielded little more than generic responses, but Ethan's persistence shone through. He reached out to the director of a nearby shelter, a stern but compassionate woman named Clara. Hello, Clara? This is Dr. Ethan Reed. I'm trying to find information about a man named Tom who was recently treated at the hospital. He might have been staying at your shelter, he said, his voice steady yet hopeful. Tom? You mean the one who came in last week? He's been in and out of our system for years, Clara replied, her tone revealing a mix of sympathy and weariness. He's a regular, but no one knows much about his past. He keeps to himself. Do you think he ever mentioned where he came from? Any family or friends? Ethan pressed, eager for any detail. Not really. He's always been quiet about it. I'll be honest, Dr. Reed, he's a complicated case. He's struggled with substance abuse, and sometimes I think he just wants to disappear, Clara said, her voice tinged with concern. But I can check our records. Maybe there's something in there that could help. Thank you, Clara. I really appreciate it, Ethan replied, a sense of urgency driving him. He hung up and leaned back in his chair, contemplating his next steps. Tom was not just another statistic. He was a human being with a story waiting to be uncovered. Meanwhile, in the hospital room, Tom stirred awake, his eyelids fluttering as he tried to piece together his surroundings. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the distant hum of medical equipment filled his senses. Confusion clouded his mind, and he struggled to remember how he had ended up here. Hey there, you're in the hospital. You collapsed outside. Do you remember? A nurse spoke softly, her demeanor warm and reassuring. Tom squinted at her, trying to focus. I don't know. I just remember feeling so cold and alone, he muttered, the weight of his words heavy with unspoken sorrow. I'm sorry you felt that way, the nurse replied, her expression sympathetic. You're safe now. We're taking care of you. But I have to tell you, there's been some talk about Dr. Reed. He was dismissed after helping you. Tom's heart sank at the mention of Ethan's name. He remembered the compassion in the doctor's eyes as he fought to save him. What do you mean? Dismissed? Because of me? The nurse nodded, her brow furrowing. He went against hospital policy. They saw it as a liability. It's not fair, but that's how it is sometimes. Guilt washed over Tom like a cold wave. He had always felt like a burden, And now, knowing that Ethan had lost his job because of him, the weight of his existence felt unbearable. "I didn't ask for any of this," he whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek. "None of this is your fault," the nurse said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You need to focus on getting better." In the following days, Ethan continued his investigation with relentless determination. He visited various shelters, each conversation peeling back layers of Tom's life like an onion. He learned about the struggles Tom faced: addiction, family estrangement, and the slow erosion of hope. Each story he uncovered was a fragment of the mosaic that was Tom's life, and it only deepened Ethan's resolve to help him. One afternoon, after a particularly enlightening visit to a shelter, Ethan returned to his office and rifled through the files he had collected. His eyes fell upon a faded photograph that had been tucked away in one of the folders. It was a picture of Tom, smiling, surrounded by a group of people who looked distinctly affluent. They were dressed in expensive clothing, their laughter frozen in time. A family portrait, perhaps, before the world had turned its back on him. Ethan's heart raced as he studied the faces. Could this be Tom's family? He wondered aloud, excitement bubbling up inside him. He flipped the photo over and noticed a name scribbled in the corner. "Tommy Hawkins." "Tommy?" Ethan murmured, letting the name roll off his tongue. It felt oddly familiar, as if it belonged to a different life. A life Tom had once lived, far removed from the streets. His mind raced with possibilities. If Tom had come from a wealthy family, how had he ended up homeless? What had happened that led to his estrangement? He needed to dig deeper. Ethan grabbed his phone and called Clara once again. "Clara, I found a picture of Tom with a family. Do you happen to know if he ever mentioned their names?" "Not really," she replied, hesitating. "But if he was in a wealthy family, there might be public records or news articles. Let me see what I can find on my end." "Thanks, Clara. Anything you can dig up would be a huge help," he said, hanging up with renewed determination. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Ethan felt a spark of hope igniting within him. He knew that uncovering Tom's past might not only help him understand the man he had tried to save, but also offer a chance for redemption. If Tom had family searching for him, perhaps this investigation could lead to a reunion that could change everything for them both. Ethan spent the evening combing through online archives and social media, searching for any trace of the Hawkins family. Hours passed, but he remained fixated on the glowing screen, driven by the urgency of his mission. Suddenly, a news article caught his eye. Billionaire philanthropist Robert Hawkins appeals for missing son. The article detailed a family tragedy that had struck the Hawkins family years ago, leading to the disconnection of their son Tom. It was a poignant reminder of how quickly life could change, how fortunes could shift, and how a family could fracture. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation settling in. Tom was not just a homeless man. He was part of a narrative that involved loss, wealth, and the desperate search for connection. He felt a surge of empathy for Tom, knowing that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but also filled with the possibility of healing. "Hang in there, Tom," he whispered into the quiet room, determination etched on his face. "I'm going to find your family." Ethan Reed sat in his small, cluttered apartment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the living room. Papers were strewn everywhere: medical journals, notes from his investigation, and a few fast food wrappers created a chaotic landscape that mirrored his mind. He had spent countless hours digging through records, searching for any clue about Tom's past, but the pieces had yet to create a coherent picture. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of exhaustion bearing down on him. The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Ethan stood, stretching his legs, and opened the door to reveal Sarah Thompson, a journalist whose sharp wit and relentless drive matched his own. She stood there, her hair slightly tousled by the wind, holding a stack of folders. "Hey, Ethan, I found something you're going to want to see," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Come in, please," he gestured, stepping aside. "What have you got?" As Sarah entered, she set the folders on the small coffee table, her demeanor turning serious. I've been digging into Tom's background, and I think I found a connection to a very powerful family. Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. Really? Who? Take a look at this, she said, flipping through the documents. Tom's last name is actually Blackwood. There's a record here that links him to the Blackwood family, one of the wealthiest families in the country. They own multiple businesses and have a reputation as philanthropists. Ethan's heart raced. The Blackwoods? I've heard of them. They're practically celebrities in the business world. But how did Tom end up on the streets? He was living in a mansion just a few years ago. Exactly, Sarah replied, her expression contemplative. There's mention of a family tragedy that caused a rift in their relationships. It looks like Tom was disowned after something happened. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. What kind of tragedy? Do you think it was related to addiction or something more? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted, her brow furrowing. But there are mentions of his mother being devastated by his disappearance. She's been searching for him for years. Ethan felt a surge of empathy. I can't imagine what she must be going through. And Tom, he must have gone through hell, right? Sarah said, her tone shifting to one of determination. We need to confront Tom with this information. He should know who he really is and that he has a family that wants him back. As they formulated a plan, Ethan's phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Hello? He answered cautiously. Dr. Reed? A voice on the other end asked, shaky yet urgent. I have information about Tom. You need to meet me. Who is this? Ethan pressed, his heart racing with curiosity and concern. I can't say over the phone. Just meet me at the old diner on 5th Street in 30 minutes. Please, it's important. Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. He looked at Sarah, who raised an eyebrow. What was that about? Someone claims to have information about Tom and wants to meet us at the diner. Ethan explained, the gravity of the situation sinking in. We have to go. Let's not waste any time, Sarah replied, grabbing her things. This could be the lead we've been looking for. The two rushed out of the apartment, the cool air hitting them as they stepped onto the bustling city streets. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting an orange hue over the buildings. They walked briskly, their minds racing with anticipation and anxiety. The diner was a small, nondescript building that had seen better days. The neon sign flickered, and the smell of coffee and grilled cheese wafted through the air as they entered. The diner was nearly empty, save for a few patrons scattered at the counter and booths. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a figure hunched over in a booth in the corner. A man in his late 40s, dressed in a worn leather jacket, looked up as they approached, his expression wary but hopeful. Are you Ethan Reed? The man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Yes, and this is Sarah Thompson, Ethan replied, taking a seat across from him. What do you know about Tom? The man glanced around nervously before leaning in closer. I saw him a couple of weeks ago. He was with a group of people who looked like they were looking for him. I didn't think much of it until I heard some of their conversation. What did they say? Sarah pressed, her pen poised over her notepad. They mentioned something about needing to find him before it was too late, the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. They were worried about how he's been living. They knew he was in a bad place, and they wanted to help him. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Did you get a name? Who were they? The man hesitated, his gaze darting around the diner. I overheard one name, Oliver Blackwood. He said something about his brother and how they couldn't let Tom ruin himself any longer. Oliver Blackwood, Ethan repeated, processing the information. That's Tom's brother? Yeah, I think so. I didn't stay long. I didn't want to get involved. But I knew I had to tell you when I heard the name. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice sincere. This could change everything for Tom. Ethan's heart raced at the thought of Tom having a brother who was looking for him. Do you know where we can find Oliver? I wish I could help, but I don't have that information. I just heard bits and pieces, the man replied, shaking his head. Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down on him again. Well, knowing that someone is looking for him gives us a direction. We just have to figure out how to connect the dots. As they left the diner, Ethan and Sarah were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city, but a chill ran down Ethan's spine. He knew they were getting closer to the truth, but he also understood that they were treading on dangerous ground. Tom's past was shrouded in pain, and the powerful family he had been estranged from had a reputation for secrecy. "Where do we go from here?" Sarah asked as they walked side by side. "We need to find Tom," Ethan replied, determination fueling his voice. "He deserves to know that he has family searching for him. But we also need to be careful. If the Blackwoods are involved, there's no telling how they'll react." "Agreed," Sarah said, her expression serious. "But we owe it to him to at least try. He's been through so much already." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had to protect Tom, not just from the world but from the shadows of his past that threatened to consume him. As they made their way to the shelter where Tom had been staying, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. What would Tom say when they confronted him with the truth? Would he be ready to hear it? The streets were alive with the sounds of the city. Cars honking, people chatting, and the distant music of street performers. But all Ethan could hear was the echo of Tom's name, a reminder that the man was more than just a homeless figure in the night. He was someone who had a story, a family, and the potential for redemption. They arrived at the shelter, a modest building with a faded sign that read, "Safe Haven." The air was thick with a mix of anticipation and dread as they stepped inside. "Let's hope he's here," Ethan said quietly, scanning the room filled with cots and chairs. As they approached the front desk, a weary-looking staff member greeted them. "Can I help you?" "We're looking for Tom Blackwood," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Tom? He's here, but he's not in the best shape," the staff member warned. "He's been struggling." Ethan's heart sank, but he pressed on. "We need to talk to him. It's important." "All right, I'll see if he's up for visitors," the staff member replied, disappearing down a hallway. Ethan exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of them feeling the weight of the moment. They were on the brink of revealing a truth that could change Tom's life forever. The question lingered in the air. Would he be ready to embrace it? The small room in the shelter was dimly lit, the musty scent of unwashed clothes mingling with the faint aroma of stale coffee. Ethan Reed and Sarah entered cautiously, scanning the space for any sign of Tom. Rows of cots lined the walls, each occupied by weary souls seeking refuge from the streets. Their hearts sank at the sight, each person a story, each face a testament to the struggles of life on the margins. "Do you think he'll talk to us?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. Ethan nodded, though doubt flickered in his chest. "We have to try. He deserves the chance to know the truth." He gestured toward a woman sitting alone in the corner, her head bent low, fingers nervously twisting a frayed blanket. "Maybe she knows where we can find him." As they approached, the woman looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Can I help you?" "Excuse me," Ethan began gently. "We're looking for Tom. Tom Carter? He was brought here a few days ago." The woman hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear them. "Tom, he's been through a lot. He's not here right now. He might be in the back, but I don't know if he'll want to see you." "Please," Sarah interjected, her voice soothing. "We're friends. We just want to help him." The woman's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "Okay, just be gentle with him. He's not in a good place." "Thank you," Ethan said, his heart racing as they moved toward the back of the shelter. The walls were thinner here, and muffled conversations drifted through, punctuated by the occasional sob or laughter, a stark reminder of the fragile humanity surrounding them. As they reached the back room, Ethan knocked lightly on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet space. "Tom, it's Ethan. Can we come in?" After a moment of silence, the door creaked open. Tom stood there, disheveled and weary, his eyes haunted but unmistakably familiar. The sight of him struck Ethan like a punch to the gut. He looked older than his years, a man whose spirit had been worn down by life's relentless challenges. "What do you want?" Tom's voice was low, defensive. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his tone calm and inviting. Tom hesitated, glancing back into the dim room behind him. "I don't know if there's anything to say." "Please," Sarah added, her compassion shining through. "We're not here to judge you. We just want to understand what happened." Tom sighed, stepping aside to let them in. The room was sparse, with only a bed and a small table cluttered with empty bottles and crumpled papers. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world rested on them. Ethan took a seat across from him, trying to gauge the turmoil behind Tom's guarded expression. "We've learned some things about you, Tom. About your family." At the mention of his family, Tom's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger igniting beneath the surface. "I don't want to talk about them. They disowned me." "That's not true," Ethan pressed gently. "They've been searching for you. They never stopped caring." Tom's expression darkened. "Caring? They kicked me out when I needed them most. I'm better off without them." "Are you?" Sarah asked softly. "You don't have to go through this alone. We're here to help you find a way back, if that's what you want." Tom looked away, tears glistening in his eyes. "You don't understand. When my brother died, I fell apart. I turned to substances to cope, and they turned their backs on me. I was the black sheep, the disgrace." Ethan leaned forward, his heart aching for the man before him. "But you're still their son. You can still reach out. They want to make things right, Tom." Tom shook his head vehemently, pain etched on his face. "You don't know what it's like to be in my shoes. I've lost everything. I'm a failure." "Failure is not the end," Ethan replied, his voice filled with empathy. "It's a part of life, but it doesn't define you. What defines you is how you choose to move forward." Tom met Ethan's gaze, vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "And what if I don't want to? What if I'm too far gone?" "Everyone has the power to change," Sarah chimed in. "It starts with taking that first step. Let us help you. You don't have to do this alone." Silence filled the room as Tom wrestled with his emotions. The walls that he had built around himself were crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of their words. He felt a surge of longing for connection, for belonging, but the fear of rejection held him back. "I don't know if I can face them," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they hate me?" "They won't," Ethan assured him. "They've been looking for you, Tom. They want to know you're okay. They want to understand." Tom's hands trembled as he clasped them together, his heart racing with the thought of reopening old wounds. "What if they see me like this? A nobody? Then let them see you," Sarah urged. "Let them see the real you, the man who survived against all odds. You deserve a chance at redemption." As the conversation unfolded, Tom felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. The thought of reconciliation, of mending the fractured ties with his family, stirred something deep inside, an ember of desire for a life beyond the streets. Ethan leaned back, sensing the shift in Tom's demeanor. "You won't be alone in this. We'll be with you every step of the way." Tom looked up, his eyes glistening as he searched for courage. "What if I'm not ready?" "Then take your time," Ethan replied. "But know that the door is open for you, and we'll be waiting." After a long pause, Tom took a deep breath, his resolve slowly building. Maybe I'll think about it." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with encouragement. "That's all we ask. Just think about it." As they left the shelter, Ethan felt a sense of unease mingled with hope. Tom was still battling his demons, but for the first time, he had taken a step toward healing. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and setbacks, but they would face it together. "Do you think he'll really reach out?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Ethan nodded, a quiet confidence settling over him. "I believe he will. He just needs time to process everything. It's a big step." Sarah glanced back at the shelter, where shadows of broken lives flickered in the windows. I hope he finds his way. He deserves a second chance. As they walked away, the weight of the day lingered in the air, but so did a fragile thread of hope. Tom was not just a victim of circumstance. He was a man with a story, a journey that could still lead him home. If only he dared to take that leap of faith. Ethan sat across from Tom in the dimly lit shelter, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the faintest hint of desperation. Ethan leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. Tom, you have to consider reaching out to your family. They're searching for you. They want to help. Tom's eyes, once vibrant, were now clouded with shadows of his past. He shook his head vehemently, his voice barely above a whisper. No, Ethan. They don't want me. I'm a ghost to them. They don't understand. They can't understand what I've been through. Ethan clenched his fists, trying to suppress the frustration that bubbled within him. But they're looking for you. Your mother. She's been speaking about you at charity events. She cares, Tom. You have to see that. Cares? Tom retorted, his voice rising, filled with bitterness. Caring is not throwing money at a problem. Caring is not pretending I don't exist. I don't want their pity or their charity. I'm fine here. Just leave me alone. Just as the tension peaked, Sarah's phone rang, breaking the silence like a thunderclap. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. Ethan, it's the source, the one who claimed to have information about Tom's family. Put it on speaker, Ethan urged, his heart racing. This could be the breakthrough they needed. Hello, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the palpable excitement in the room. Is this Sarah? I have information regarding Tom's family. The voice crackled through the speaker, urgent and low. Yes, we're listening. They're holding a charity event at the Sterling tonight. Your friend's family will be there. They've been searching for him for years. If you hurry, you might catch them before the event ends. Ethan's heart raced as he exchanged a glance with Tom. We have to go, Tom. This might be your only chance. Tom's expression hardened, a mixture of fear and resignation washing over him. No, I can't just walk into that place. What if they don't want me back? What if they've moved on? They haven't moved on, Ethan insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. You belong with them. Let's at least give it a try. You owe it to yourself to know. As Tom wrestled with his emotions, Sarah's determination shone through. We're with you, Tom. You don't have to do this alone. We'll face them together. A moment of silence enveloped them before Tom finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. Okay, I'll go. But if it gets too much, I'm leaving. Ethan and Sarah exchanged a relieved glance, the weight of the moment pressing down upon them. They quickly made their way to the Sterling, the upscale restaurant pulsating with the energy of the charity gala. As they approached, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, creating a stark contrast to the somber mood that hung over Tom. Stay close, Ethan instructed as they entered the venue. The opulence of the decorations, golden chandeliers, lavish floral arrangements, seemed to shimmer in the light, but Tom remained oblivious to it all, his heart pounding in his chest. They moved through the crowd, scanning the sea of well-dressed patrons until Sarah spotted a familiar face on stage. There, that's Tom's mother, she whispered, her breath hitching in her throat. On stage, Tom's mother, Eleanor, stood elegantly, her voice resonating with emotion as she spoke about her missing son. Every day, we hold out hope that Tom will come home. He is not just a name on a missing persons list. He is our son, and we love him dearly. Ethan felt Tom stiffen beside him, his eyes locked onto the woman who once held him close. I can't do this, Tom breathed, panic flashing across his features. Before Ethan could respond, Tom's mother continued, If anyone has seen him, please, I implore you to bring him back to us. He deserves a second chance. As the heartfelt plea echoed through the room, Tom stepped back, retreating into the shadows. I can't face her, Ethan. I can't. Just wait, Ethan urged, grabbing his arm gently. Listen to her. She loves you, Tom. You're not a burden to her. You're her son." Just as Eleanor finished her speech, a collective gasp swept through the audience. Tom, who had been standing at the back, took a deep breath and stepped forward. His heart raced as he felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him, but he couldn't turn back now. He had to face them. "Mom!" he called out, his voice trembling but resolute. Eleanor's gaze snapped to him, disbelief flashing across her features, quickly transforming into overwhelming joy. "Tom!" she exclaimed, rushing off the stage, her arms outstretched. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as she reached him, and in an instant, they were enveloped in an embrace that spoke volumes of lost years and unspoken love. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she held her son tightly, her body shaking with emotion. "Where have you been?" she cried, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "We've been searching for you." "I'm so sorry, Mom," Tom whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how to come back. I thought you'd hate me." Ethan watched the reunion, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and joy. He turned to Sarah, who was wiping away tears of her own. "This is incredible," she said softly. "I never thought we'd see this day." Tom pulled away slightly, looking into his mother's eyes. "I've made so many mistakes. I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't know how to face everything." Eleanor cupped his face in her hands, her eyes searching his. "You're my son, Tom. You could never hurt me. We can work through this together. I promise." As they stood there, surrounded by the murmurs of the astonished crowd, Ethan realized that his actions had not only saved a life, but had also mended a broken family. The weight of the hospital's dismissal faded into the background as he witnessed this profound moment of redemption and hope. "Thank you," Tom said, glancing at Ethan and Sarah, his voice steadying. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Ethan smiled, the warmth of that moment enveloping him. "You deserve this, Tom. You deserve a second chance." In the midst of the celebration, the trio stood together, bound by the threads of fate that had intertwined their lives. As laughter and tears filled the air, Ethan felt a sense of purpose ignite within him. Sometimes, the greatest battles are the ones fought not in the confines of a hospital but in the hearts of those we strive to save.